Mini episode 896 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 896. It's FDH managing partner Rick Morris here today with one of my favorite longtime FDH Lounge dignitaries, my good friend Steve Kallas. You can catch him on a number of New York media outlets from time to time, of course, SNY, WFAN, etc., etc. He is all over the place talking sports, and, of course, the weekly podcast that he does with fellow FDH Lounge dignitary Joe Stazak, Kallas Remarks. You can enjoy that every week on the Sportsology Radio Network. Always a pleasure to have Steve on. We talked at the beginning of the 2017 baseball postseason, and we talked today to preview the World Series. Steve, good to have you on. There has certainly been some October heartbreak for both of us, my friend. Your Yankees upended, thwarted the predictions of both of us, took the Cleveland Indians out in the division series, and then in the American League Championship Series, the Houston Astros hung on. You and I had all the same predictions going into the postseason. For the predictions that I made subsequently on the FDH Lounge blog, the fdhlounge.blogspot.com, I had the Astros and the Dodgers in the second round, so I'm 4-2 in the playoffs, counting getting both of the wild card games right. But a couple of big misses by me and you as we saw Arizona taking out the Dodgers and the Indians taking out the Yankees.
Yeah, great to be with you as always, Rick. I think I'm worried. Look, I thought the Indians, frankly, were going to win it all, but I'm worried about them now that they blew a 2-game lead in the World Series last year, and they blew a 2-game lead this year against the Yankees. At some point, that becomes a worrisome pattern. You know, last year you could say whatever you want to say about it, but happens 2 years in a row, that's an issue. I did not think the Yankees, I was surprised, frankly, that they even made the playoffs, but they had an incredible run. These young kids really, the future is bright, and I really thought that the Yankees essentially waved the white flag last year for last year and this year when they traded Miller. I knew they might sign Chapman coming back. I wish they hadn't traded Andrew Miller. He was a key factor last year for the Indians, as you know. Was hurt a couple times this year, but did pitch in the playoffs. But Miller at $9 million this year and $9 million next year, I thought the Yankees made a gigantic mistake. And if they kept him, they would not have had to spend $85 million on Chapman. So I really think in a nuanced way that really kind of hurts them. They got a couple of good players. Clint Frazier looks like he's a good player.
Yep.
Sheffield's nephew is a pretty good pitcher in the minors, but as I said last year, and I'll say this year, these guys better be all-stars for a long time to come, because I think with Miller last year they would have made the playoffs, and I think this year they would have been stronger because they could have taken. I think he's a better reliever than Chapman. He's certainly more versatile. He doesn't have those funks, I don't think, that Chapman has. And again, with $85 million, Yankees could have gone and gotten another top starting pitcher. Cashman did a great job at the trade deadline. But frankly, as you know, the Astros-Yankees series became a home field advantage series, and the Astros had the home field. So that, I think, if it was 7 games and the 7th game was in Yankee Stadium, I think the Yankees would have won, frankly.
Very possibly. And again, I don't go so far as an Indians fan to rue the Andrew Miller trade. I don't think I ever could. But I'll tell you this, again, those are two elite prospects you got, and they weren't the only prospects in the deal. But Clint Frazier is an elite power prospect, just as Sheffield is an elite pitching prospect. So I think you are going to laugh last from a Yankees perspective on that one. But the World Series that we get here, of course, L.A. and Houston, and I have a little bit of a preview here on the show. We always put up an FDH Lounge Notes and Oddities column for a lot of big-time sporting events here, angles that we find. So here are some of the ones that are going up in this year's column. That, first of all, this is a meeting of two teams that have met more games cumulatively between their franchises than any other two teams in World Series history. The reason being, the Dodgers and the Astros shared the National League for 50 years, from 1962 to 2012. They were in the National League West together from 69 to 93. There weren't too many memorable times between them for them being divisional rivals, but in the 80s you did have a lot. You had the Dodgers winning a lot of divisional titles from 77 to 88. You had 6 of them, but the Astros clocking in at 80 and 86. So they were both good for the same time at about that point in time. But the Astros are able to become the first team to win both the National League pennant, as they did in 2005, and now the American League pennant, having moved over, winning it in 2017. It was the St. Louis Cardinals in a rematch of the 1982 World Series, oddly enough, with Milwaukee, that stopped Milwaukee from being able to join Houston, or rather be the first team rather than Houston to win pennants in both leagues. So Houston makes it first, and interestingly enough, Houston lost to a legacy franchise in the 2005 World Series that was coming off a long drought, 88 years, I believe, with the White Sox. Now, the Dodgers' 29-year drought is not as long, but still, a drought is a drought. The folks in LA will tell you it's been a long time. They'd love to replicate what the 2005 White Sox did. If you look at geography here, I think Silicon Valley might have something to say about this, but a lot of people would consider LA to be the capital of the West Coast. I think Houston almost definitely is considered the capital of the Gulf Coast, so you have that part of it there. Not much sports history of note between the cities. I would say the most noteworthy chapters came in 1981 and 1986. Both years, the Rockets took out the Lakers in the playoffs when they were the defending champions. In 81, it was the first round. In 86, it was the West Finals. And the Dodgers happen to have a minority partner who may very well have a sharp memory of those series, named Magic Johnson. So one wonders how much he's thinking back to 81 and 86 right about now, as Houston is in there. This is the 6th time since divisional baseball started in 1969 that we've gotten a West versus West World Series. The American League is 3-2 in those ones. And the Dodgers are 1-1 in those World Series. It's a split with the Oakland A's in 1974 and 1988, which was, of course, the last time they were in the World Series. You've got Houston having something that works against them statistically. I don't know how much this is scientific or not, but it is an 0-4 trend that they are trying to buck. Cities that have both hosted a Super Bowl in the same year and a World Series. The last time it happened was up the road in the Metroplex in 2011, when the Super Bowl was at Jerry World and the Rangers were in the World Series. Previous times in Detroit in 2006, in San Diego in 1998, and in Greater Los Angeles in 1977, given that the Super Bowl was at the Rose Bowl that year. 0-4 when a city is trying to win the World Series when they've hosted a Super Bowl earlier that year. Cause and effect? Who knows? But it's out there. This is the first time the two teams have met in the World Series that have won 100 games apiece since 1970, with Cincinnati beating Baltimore that year. Also a little bit of a ring of a World Series from exactly a quarter century later, 95, if you're looking at hitting versus pitching. Not a perfect point of comparison here because you've got Houston's pitching, of course, being above average, especially with Justin Verlander in there, and LA's offense being very good as well. And lastly, another interesting trend here in terms of Houston, this makes it an extraordinarily newsworthy year for them. World Series, Super Bowl, and unfortunately the donut hole in the middle here, the bad news of Hurricane Harvey. But this is kind of an odd trend that we have seen the last couple of years. Cities being sort of top-heavy for big events. I guess if you want to consider a natural disaster an event as well. But last year, the Bay Area had the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals. Cleveland had the NBA Finals, the World Series, the Republican National Convention, and something I would say is pretty rare, an American-born UFC heavyweight champion defending the title at home. And I will tell you, when Stipe Miocic defended the title successfully at the Q, that's a roar much like what it would have sounded like if the Cavs won the championship at home. So Houston getting a big event here, and again, hopefully something to help take a little bit of the sting out of Hurricane Harvey. It's been a tough several weeks down there in Houston. But again, a very, very newsworthy year. I interviewed a great member of the local media there, Deborah Duncan, around the time of the Super Bowl, talking about what the Houston media scene was like with covering the Super Bowl, and neither she nor I could have really anticipated what lay ahead. Obviously, you knew the Astros were a really good team that would have a chance to be here, but who knows how it's going to play out. So, with all those notes and oddities there, Steve, anything jump out at you? Are the Astros necessarily doomed because no city's ever hosted a Super Bowl and won the World Series in the same year?
Well, that's an interesting stat. Obviously, I don't think it's really cause and effect, but it's the old you never know. I wonder. I assume that's a prop bet somewhere in Vegas. I'm going to guess, but
sure.
Yeah, I find a lot of that stuff fascinating. But that really is the most fascinating one. That it has happened 4 times, so it's not just like a one-off thing. So we'll see what happens. But I have to say that's not going to enter into my analysis, but. You never know if the Dodgers win, and I'm kind of leaning towards the Dodgers. Maybe that'll just be 0-5, and there is something to it.
Yeah, I got to think so as well. And, when you're looking at this, just overall from a big picture standpoint, in terms of how this gets sort of taken in by the American public, conversation today with another FDH Lounge dignitary, my good friend Ben Chu, who, if I were to say he is both a millennial and a casual at best baseball fan, I'm afraid that would be redundant because I think all millennials are pretty much casual at best baseball fans. But, he was talking about this and that, again, he was sort of questioning how much this is going to really kind of grab the mainstream. He and I both agreed. You're not going to see the ratings nadir of 2014 with the Giants and the Royals. You're not going to see the huge heights last year of Cubs-Indians. If I had to guess which it's going to be a little closer to, I might perhaps say a little closer to last year because of the market size and because of the curiosity of the Dodgers being back in it. But I don't think it's going to be the monster numbers we saw of a year ago. But this is just one of these things, and I'm going to throw out the name of the biggest star of them all who is playing in this, Clayton Kershaw. To me, hands down, not only the best pitcher of a generation, but the best since you and I have talked going back to Sandy Koufax. His name gets thrown out there. I think he's the best in several decades, or at least he will be by the time his career's done, barring any kind of injuries at this point. So it's a thing where you look at it, and in the NFL, in the NBA, you have mainstream star names that are in the championship, and people kind of gravitate towards that. This sort of more reminds me of the Stanley Cup, as much as I hate to say that, because it's not a great comparison when you're talking mainstream. But, last year, for example, got Crosby and Malkin and Subban in the Stanley Cup. Legitimately some of the biggest stars in the sport. And the mainstream, of course, as we knew they wouldn't, really didn't take much notice of it. The mainstream will take more attention of this. But it just, to me, when you're looking at Verlander being in there as well, in terms of long-time star power, there's a lot of young stars on both sides here, but names that should be known to the mainstream, Kershaw and Verlander and some of these other guys here, and who really aren't to the degree of the stars who came before them, that's something where it's going to be very curious to me to see if any of these guys, however belatedly, kind of break through and have a mainstream moment to where America kind of clutches them to their chest.
Well, I agree with you on Kershaw. We've talked about it many times, but I'm on record as saying many times that Kershaw is Sandy Koufax in the regular season. Just go look at the numbers. Having said that, as you know, before these playoffs, Kershaw was 4-7 lifetime in the playoffs with a 4.55 ERA, and I thought he has to do a whole lot, and I don't think no matter what happens, he's going to get his rep as a great postseason pitcher. Now this year, he gave up 4 solo home runs, but it was after he had like a 7-0 lead, so he got the win despite his postseason ERA going up. In the last game, they were up 9-0. Look, he's pitched well in the postseason this year, but I think he's had some failures in the past. It still remains to be seen how great he's going to be. In fact, I remember when they announced that Kershaw was going to start Game 1 of the playoffs, and the announcer doing the national game, I forget who it was, said, well, of course. And I remember thinking, well, hold on now. They got Darvish, they got Rich Hill. I thought they had Alex Wood is like the forgotten guy. He was 10-0 with a 1.67 ERA at the All-Star break. He didn't even make the All-Star team. The only reason he did make it was because Kershaw pitched on Sunday. So he's like the forgotten guy, and they started him after 22 days, and he was just so-so. So is Kershaw the big name? 100%. Is he one of the greatest regular season pitchers in the history of baseball? level, absolutely. If you say anyone is Sandy Koufax in New York, or as you know, Koufax started as a Brooklyn Dodger before he really became Sandy Koufax in the 60s, that's like blasphemy. And I've taken a lot of grief for saying it, but I'll say it again. Just look at the records. And as great as I think Koufax is, and I think Koufax is not only the greatest pitcher I've ever seen, because I'm old enough to have seen him when I was a kid, in the 60s, it looked to me like he shut out the Mets every year. Back in the 60s, you didn't go see the Mets until 69. You didn't go see the Mets. You went to see the Mets to see the National League stars, Willie Mays, Sandy Koufax, Roberto Clemente. And as a very little kid, my father was a diehard baseball guy, and he took me to see all these guys. So I know what Koufax can do and did do, and his record speaks for itself. As you know, he had 5 great years, 5 of the greatest maybe 5-year stretch ever, and his ERA is like 0.90 in the World Series. So that makes a difference to me. And can Kershaw reclaim that in 1 year? I don't think so, but here's his chance, right? He's on the biggest stage. I think they're the better team. Verlander found the fountain of youth. He pitched very well for Detroit his last 4 or 5 starts before he came over to the Astros. He's undefeated with the Astros. What he did against the Yankees, 106 pitches through 8 innings, and he comes out for the 9th. Now, that would not be a big deal in the 60s, but in 2017, that's like unbelievable. And then not only that, to come back on regular rest, not short rest, but on regular rest, and then throw 7 great innings against the Yankees again. He's really cemented himself as a playoff pitcher, but you probably know this, in the World Series, he's 0-3 with like a 7.20 ERA. So Verlander has a lot to prove as well. So it'll be very interesting to watch. But yes, you're right. These are Verlander's a Hall of Famer. I don't think his numbers quite stack up with Kershaw's in terms of career, but Verlander has shown enough. And this playoff series against the Yankees in 2017 is one for the ages.
It really is. And again, when you look at it, I think for a number of years, Verlander and Kershaw were neck and neck. I think clearly Kershaw has pulled away, not just by being at a historic pace himself, but a little bit of the downturn that Verlander had before sort of getting back to that level in the next 2 years.
Yes.
So you look at this, and when you're looking at the star power on both sides, you know, it's a little bit unscientific just to kind of go off a list of names here, but you know, like you were talking about, it's not just Kershaw. You've got Darvish in there as far as the big-time arms. Jansen in the bullpen, arguably the best closer in baseball. Bellinger at first base should be the slam dunk rookie of the year in the National League. Corey Seager, if he's back in there for the World Series, and I understand we're taping this on a Sunday night. Monday, he is going to be going through some tests. He would very much like to play. I think it would be great for baseball if he was able to in any way, just because of the matchup of him versus Correa on the other side. That would really spotlight the shortstop resurgence in baseball like few other things could. You've got Justin Turner, a breakout star there, and every man who has really become a big star at third base. Yasiel Puig with his resurgence in the outfield this year. And again, guys that you were talking about here, Hill and Wood, I don't think, you know, we would not want to put them on the level of being superstars just yet. I think both of them have to prove it a little bit more, but they've been playing at that level this year, no question about it. And if you're looking at just sort of superstar emeritus, Chase Utley, one of the great players of his generation, who's just kind of going on fumes now. He's a bench guy, but he is still valuable coming off the bench there. So superstar emeritus. On the other side, it's funny because it's a little bit thinner if you're talking names, but they might be getting valuable contributions, especially in the lineup, from more guys. Justin Verlander, of course, in the rotation. Dallas Keuchel, a former Cy Young Award winner for Houston, who had been the ace before Verlander got there. The middle infield par excellence. I mean, I like to say I'll put the tribe one of Ramirez when he's playing second and Lindor against anybody, but oof. Altuve and Correa at second base and shortstop. I might have to give the nod there, sadly enough. George Springer in the outfield, who I have to say, just on a personal pride level, I've had him on my keeper league team since he was playing at UConn. So good to see him break out into what he's become. You can keep guys for up to 10 years in this league, Steve, so we try to get them early. But, you know, they've really got something strong there. Alex Bregman at third base, who is, I think, progressing towards that level. He could be on the level of Correa and Springer here at some point. You started to see it more in the second half of the season. And they even have their own superstar emeritus in Carlos Beltran. They're sort of equivalent of Utley of once in a while. I forget the exact name of that country song, but I ain't what I once was, but once in a while I can be what I used to be. And I'm mangling the lyrics completely. But Beltran and Utley, also all the country people out there are laughing at me for mangling that. But, on the right, in the right moment, on the right stage, either one of these guys could come through and really be an X factor in addition to all the big names of today.
I don't disagree with any of that. I would say I'd throw McCann in there. Finally did have 2 big hits and a real nice play at home.
Yes.
But I thought the difference, I think we talked about this, I think the difference in the Astros is not because of the great play of Beltran and or McCann, but because of their experience, their playoff experience. You remember Carlos Beltran became Carlos Beltran many years ago with that incredible playoff run for Houston, and when he was a young player. But now they really are the older veterans, and I think I thought Houston had a tremendous amount of talent last year. You're right; they're all a year older. Altuve is a superstar. I think he is the MVP. But I think it was the professional influence of Beltran and McCann. McCann can still handle and does handle the pitching staff well. That play in the Yankee game, that tag at home that Bregman made throwing home when it was a 0-0 game in Game 7 was an unbelievable play. You could have almost forgiven him if he had just thrown the ball to first, but he didn't. I like Bregman, but I think he's much better against lefties than righties. And I do have to say, and I'm sure the Dodgers are doing this, Houston won that series against the Yankees 7 games, despite the fact that Springer was 3 for 26, leadoff hitter. Reddick batting second was 0 for 21 after hitting 314 in the regular season. They dropped him to 9th in the order, and they put Bregman up first. He was 1 for 4. So their 1 and 2 hitters in a 7-game series went 4 for 51. That's an 0.78 batting average. That's got to be some kind of record in terms of ineptitude, but still winning a series. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this series, but I do think that they're going to find ways. The Dodgers are going to find ways. All they have to do is put in the tape. You got 7 games of it to find ways to pitch to Springer and to Reddick. I will say the Yankee pitchers, for the most part, it was like the good Tanaka as opposed to the bad Tanaka, and he was inconsistent all year. Sabathia, it's taken him 2 or 3 years, but he finally is. I don't want to call him a junk baller, but he certainly is more of a pitcher than a thrower. He hasn't thrown 96, 97 for like 4 years. It took him a long time to get there, but he's there. He's probably earned himself another contract. Severino has electric stuff. He's still young, but they had guys who really got the Astros out. The Astros, all the reports out of Houston were they could not believe. Now, they exploded a couple times later in games, but they could not believe how bad their offense was, and they have an incredible offense. So I think there are ways to pitch to these guys. I think the Dodgers will get the blueprint from the Yankee series, and as we've already talked about, they do have the pitchers both in the starting rotation and in the bullpen to throw those pitches. Conversely, Keuchel and Verlander were able to do the same thing to the Yankees, frankly. Hey, in Game 7, it was unbelievable. McCullers, who, was an all-star early in the season and was bad, was on the DL, later in the year. He was unbelievable in relief in Game 7. I didn't think he could possibly throw 4 innings. And who was it? Morton started 5 innings.
Yes.
You really thought the Yankees might have had a little advantage there. Although, as you know, it was a 7-game series where every home team won. So you kind of had to lean towards the Astros, and eventually they did break out. But they pulled some out quickly. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but then they were relying on the bullpen that had been really good. McCanley hadn't given up a run, but that was the end. One mistake with a reliever can cost you a 7-game series, and I thought that's kind of what happened in Game 7 between the Astros and the Yankees. But I think you can now pitch to the Astros, and I don't think anybody really thought that at the end of the regular season. We'll just have to see what happens. And again, I think the Dodgers have the starters and relievers. I don't think the Astros, I think obviously have the starters, but I don't think they have the relievers to match up with the Dodger hitting late in the game.
Well, you threw out a bunch of very fine stuff there, and I'm going to throw out some imponderables here, some on the one hand, on the other hand things for you, and you can kind of sort through this. By the way, the thing about the Yankees, it's funny how much that almost goes back to my previous point about Carlos Beltran, who, of course, is associated with the Yankees, and Chase Utley, who played against him in the '09 World Series, in terms of how the pitching that the Yankees got, not from Severino, but from the other guys. By the way, that Google tells me that country song I was looking for, as I now remember, Toby Keith, I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. And that's, that happened against Houston. But again, in terms of the on the one hand, on the other hand, the fact that these guys, CC's sort of a glorified junk baller at this point, might have actually kind of worked for the Yankees. Maybe it was easier to have that Toby Keith moment because this is one of the weird things I came up with in the research here. Of course, the Dodgers were better in terms of getting the fastball past people this year in different spots, high fastball especially, but just really elite at that. The Astros were able to counteract the fastball in whatever spot it was in better than any team in baseball. So it's a total strength-on-strength kind of a deal here. Unless the Dodgers are going to voluntarily start junk balling a little bit, and maybe, who knows, maybe they'll go to a little bit more off-speed than they normally would. But just attacking them the way they would attack anybody else, like you said, they might have to go to the Yankees' blueprint and almost sort of dumb it down in terms of their stuff a little bit, just in terms of what was successful there. But, you look at it, and there's some more on the one hand, on the other hand stuff in terms of one of the things that really helped the Dodgers thus far in both rounds was Arizona went through a meat grinder in the wild card game. They came in very much ripe for the picking. And the same thing happened with the Cubs going down to the wire with the Nationals in that series. Both times LA was just sitting at home, having grapes fed to them, fanning themselves and waiting for the next team. And here we go again with Houston. So on the one hand, you got that going. On the other hand, I'm looking at it like you talked about this, and yeah, Reddick, Springer, whatever, not a pretty series. But it's the law of averages, man. If I'm Houston and I got through that series with nothing from those guys, I'm feeling good right about now because that is not going to continue indefinitely here. Those guys are going to get it going, and if you were good enough to beat the Yankees without them, the Dodgers are a better team, we can both agree. You're going to need more, but the odds are you're going to get more. So I just gave you an awful lot of equivocation here on the one hand, on the other hand, and you plow through that as best as you want to.
No, I think those are all things, but for example, on the fastballs, yes, everybody knows the Astros are the best hitting fastball team, and the analytics guys can maybe differentiate it to some degree. But CC Sabathia is literally a changeup in the midst of a bunch of hard throwers, including a young guy like Severino, who is always the last few years among the highest average fastballs in baseball. I think one year he led the league in the highest average fastball in baseball. So I think there is something to that. I don't think the Dodger pitches will change, but as you know, Kershaw throws off-speed stuff. He's got a tremendous curveball. I think they might lean towards that way some more, but I don't think it's realistic to think, a power pitcher is going to become a junk pitcher. But I do think they will throw more off-speed stuff, change-ups, maybe fastballs out of the zone, for example, which is something the Yankees did. So I think, that's an interesting dynamic, but I was shocked that the Astros collapsed. You're right. If there's if they, I guess, revert to the mean, you would think these two guys. I mean, I watched the Astros a lot this year, and Springer, especially to me, was like, oh my goodness, this guy's an incredible leadoff hitter. And as I said, Reddick hit 314, but they were nowhere to be found. And they looked. I said it a few times. They looked like AAA players. Offensively in the playoffs, obviously Springer made a couple of great defensive plays. I think Reddick made a couple of really good throws as well. But I just think the Dodgers are too deep, and I'll say I think it's going to be decided in the later innings. This is no longer the good old days when you're essentially betting starting pitchers. I mean, those days are long gone. So a lot of it has to do with bullpens. I didn't think there'd be any complete games pitched in the playoffs, and Verlander, to his credit, pitched one for the ages. But His numbers weren't even good after throwing 120 pitches, as you know, and you can analyze this to death, but his numbers weren't good, and he was great his next start against the Yankees. And that's Verlander's a bulldog. Again, he's a throwback to another time. But I think a lot of these games are going to be decided late. I think they're going to be decided by the bullpens, and I didn't see anything coming out of the Houston pen that compares to what the Dodgers did. And I'm sure you know that the Dodgers, their relievers in 17 innings against the Cubs gave up no runs. I mean, that's incredible. Their average for the whole playoffs, their average allowed, batting average against them is 125. These are incredible numbers. But what they did to the Cubs, and I thought they were the difference. I mean, obviously it was only 5 games. But I thought that was the difference, and I think that will be the difference as well here, because I just don't think that the Houston bullpen is going to match up well with the offense of the Dodgers, even though they got the job done, and I'm kind of putting that in quotes, against the Yankees.
I would agree with a lot of what you're saying there, and again, I'm going to kind of zoom out for the big picture a little bit here as we start to bring this to a close. But one of the things also, too, that bears note about the LA bullpen is that it has been used in a relatively pure way, far more so than Houston's was, meaning it's pretty much been just the relievers in there and not any of the starters, unless it's starters that weren't part of the postseason rotation anyways. There's been no kind of, quote-unquote cheating on that, and not cheating in terms of unethical, but cheating in terms of trying to get more from some guys than you want to get. Houston's had to rely on that. We'll see if it catches up to them. I'm going to see if you agree with me here on the sort of checklist here, big picture. Hitting, while it's closer, like I said, then some people would kind of make it. This is not like 95. It's not a pure pitching versus hitting World Series, but I think we'd all have to give the edge to Houston, particularly if Corey Seager doesn't play. But I think they've got even a slight edge if he does play. Defensively, the Dodgers, again, and this goes to their analytics department, they are elite defensively. They've really got the positioning down. They've got the edge there. Rotation and bullpen, we've both said this, that you have to give the edge to the Dodgers. In terms of the running game, neither team necessarily notorious for that, but Houston defensively creates some opportunities for the Dodgers if they want to create a little bit of mischief on the base paths. And while Dave Roberts doesn't manage a team that does an awful lot in the way of running, hey, he himself remembers what it was like to run. So you may see a little bit of that. He's coaching to the strengths of his team, but you might see a little bit of the old running muscle memory popping back in. Speaking of the brains on the benches here, I would call it about even, because I think both Roberts and A.J. Hinch have done a tremendous job here. Hinch, a much better job here than previously in Arizona, no doubt about it. He has been the guy to guide along this rebuilding project and can stamp himself alongside Joe Madden if they go all the way in terms of a guy who captained this ship to the very top. In terms of the bench, this is one where, again, I'm going to give it to Houston, and I think it may even be a little bit more pronounced the games in L.A. there. Those are games where a lot of times you figure that the National League team has an advantage. And yeah, Houston's not looking forward to trotting out any of their pitchers to bat, but the fact that Carlos Beltran is not going to be in the lineup, he'll be coming off the bench. You've got Marwin Gonzalez on an average day on the bench there, 23 home runs. Evan Gattis, 12 home runs in about half the season coming off the bench here. So I give a little bit of the depth edge to Houston, and I think that's part of the reason that their offense is better, is that 1 through 9, you get a little bit more. Well, obviously 1 through 9 with the Dodgers, they got a pitcher hitting, right? But 1 through 8, however you want to call it, I give the edge to Houston. I just don't think it's going to be enough of an edge in the end. I'm with you on the direction of the series. I look at this, and I think it's going to be a great series. I think it has a chance to go 7, but I think it's going to go 6. I will say Dodgers in 6. They get a chance to clinch at Chavez Ravine.
Well, I wish you would have let me go on first, because I just picked Dodgers in 6 on Philadelphia radio with Joe Staszak. But I will say this about the hitting. I agree with your analysis on everything, including the benches, but I will say this about the hitting. I think, yes, Houston has a better offensive lineup. I just saw them not be very offensive against the Yankees. I think the Dodger pitchers is as good or better than the Yankees, even though I think the Yankees pitching is very good. But I will say this, that hitting gap, whatever it is, probably a little, but it is Houston. I think that gap disappears when you're having the Houston bullpen against the Dodger hitters, while you're having the Dodger bullpen against the Houston hitters. At that point, I think it's at least equal, and the shifts might even switch to the Dodgers, only because of the quality of the pitching they will be facing, and I just don't think that quality is there for Houston, to the point where, as you know, they essentially pitched two starters in Game 7, brought nobody in. I think Giles is a good closer. He's not Kenley Jansen, but the other guys, Hinch essentially gave up on, I thought, and rightfully so. And look, he got the job done. But I do think the hitting with this to Houston's advantage. I agree with your analysis. I think that kind of shifts, certainly equal, maybe even shifts, when you get later in the game. And I'll say it again, very few pitchers are going to pull a Verlander, which is what it should be called nowadays, and go 9 innings. I don't know that it'll happen again. I don't even know if Verlander will be able to do it.
No, I don't think he will. And again, we're not likely at this point to see Verlander matching up with Kershaw, which is kind of a shame.
Right.
Again, probably the best two pitchers of their generation. Certainly Kershaw's one. I think Verlander has a strong argument for number 2, especially the way that he's bounced back in the last 2 years. A guy who is going to be a very critical X factor here, Chris Davinsky. You started to hear towards the beginning of the year because, again, baseball, like every other sport, is copycats. You look at analytics, defense, spray charts in recent years. We talked about Andrew Miller previously here, and there was a sense that, I mean, A.J. Hinch didn't, hold a press conference and say, Chris Davinsky is going to be our version of Andrew Miller. But basically, yeah, that's what he was trying to do with him, and it was working until it didn't work, and it really stopped kind of working recently here. But again, you're going to have bridge guys to be able to come in and get it done. You can't, again, not unethically cheat. That's not what I'm talking about. But as far as running your starters out there, just relying on them, starter, closer. No, that's not going to work. So Chris Davinsky, if he can be effective, if he can regain the trust of A.J. Hinch, and he may get put into a situation before he regains the trust, it may be a desperate situation where they got to try him and hope for the best. If he pitches well, that could be a turning point for Houston. Again, Houston's going to need a lot of things to go right, I think, to win this series because of the gap in pitching, and I think Davinsky is going to be a key to that. But, yeah, Houston in 6, but it's going to be something where, again, it's going to be fascinating. One gigantic market in L.A. and another very good-sized market in Houston. A lot of star power. It will be very interesting not only to watch it play out, but to see how it is received in the media. And, again, a great 2017 World Series, I think, is ahead of us starting Tuesday night, my friend.
Yeah, and I think you just said mistakenly Houston in 6. I know you picked
I'm sorry, yes, L.A. in 6. Yeah.
But I do want to say specifically about Davinsky, at the end of this series, Hinch totally lost confidence in him. And the problem for Hinch now is I don't know if you'll get that spot in one of the early games. For example, Girardi brought Betances in because he had totally lost confidence. Betances, who was like an all-star, was up, down this year. Very inconsistent. When you're 6'8" and your mechanics go, it's hard to correct them. Took Randy Johnson, as you know, years to become Randy Johnson. He brought him in. Girardi brought him in the lopsided game, and he walked the first 2 guys, and he never came back in Houston. So likewise with Davinsky at the end, Hinch would not use him, and he might find a spot early if it's a 7-1 game either way to give him a chance to come back in. But more so than with the Yankees, they need him. The Yankees didn't really need Betances. Could they have used him? Absolutely. Was he an all-star this year? Yes. But he was so up and down and so bad at the beginning of the playoffs that he was a forgotten man. There was actually talk if they made the World Series, would they leave him on the roster? I don't think they would, because if he got it back and they gave him one chance to get it back and he didn't, he could be a key factor. He's a great reliever when he's good. Davinsky isn't, to me, Betances when he's good, but obviously he's been a good reliever, and Houston's going to have to do something to fill in those back two. Now, a Keuchel, Verlander, they can give you 7 solid. Verlander has even given you more, as you know. But that's going to be 4 games probably out of 7. The stats on short rest, I'm sure you know, over the years have been pretty bad, frankly. So I think you're loath to throw somebody on 3 days rest. And I think, frankly, that's why Houston did what they did in Game 7. They used 2 starters, one for 5 innings, one for 4 innings. And to their credit, it worked out. But I think that's the big hole in this series. and we'll just have to see if I believe that's what could very well decide this World Series, the Houston bullpen.
Very much could be. If they rise up, if they're better than we expect them to be, I think that has to be a pretty critical feature here in terms of Houston being able to win this World Series. Should be a great one aesthetically as well. Dodger Stadium, a great park. Minute Maid, one of my very favorite parks in baseball. Would love to get to catch a game at both places someday, but looking forward to watching us all unfold in HD, as we all will. So, as always, a pleasure to have you on, my good friend Steve Kallas. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and being a great part of our 2017 World Series preview.
Great to be with you, Rick. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for being on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today in the audience for FDH Lounge mini episode number 896.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.